If there's one thing I've learned from living in this small town in the countryside, it's that neighbors who are the boss of everything will always exist. It was a quiet morning, or so I thought. I woke up early, had my coffee, and went to the stable where my beloved Vaca Matilda used to wait for me. But when I got there was no Maud. The gate to the fence was open. The rope that tied her to the stable was lying on the ground, as if it had been ripped off by force. My heart raced. A cow doesn't just disappear. I looked around, checked the dirt road for footprints, any clue that might tell me where my Maud had gone. But it wasn't until a few minutes later that I heard loud music and screams coming from the woman's house. Of course, it could only be her. I approached the street where her house was, and that's when my stomach turned inside out. A barbecue. The smell of meat roasting on the fire was strong, mixed with exaggerated laughter and the sound of glasses clinking. There was a huge tent set up in the backyard. Several people from the community were there, gorging themselves as if it were the party of the century. And then I saw it. In the middle of the decorations, next to a gigantic barbecue grill, there was a large handmade sign that read, "Great Community Barbecue, courtesy of Karen." It was at that very moment that a thought struck me. That cow on the grill was not just any cow. My blood boiled. I took a deep breath, trying not to run off and make a fuss in the middle of that ridiculous party. But inside, I could already see the scene. Me knocking that grill to the ground, meat flying through the air, that woman staring at me with that look on her face that only slackers can do. I held back the impulse. Still, I went around the side of the house, slipping between the bushes and makeshift fences. Then I spotted the makeshift stable at the back. And guess what? Maud was there. She was tied up with a short rope, looking at me with those meek cow eyes, clearly not understanding anything. The woman had the audacity to steal my cow and use it as part of the decoration for the event, as if it were a fancy farm ornament. My patience, which was already thin, was at an end. But I wasn't going to act on impulse. Not yet. I had a plan. And it involved a certain town sheriff, who loved to put the pen to anyone who thought they were above the law. My fingers itched to get out there in the middle of the party, grab that woman by the collar, and make her swallow every piece of meat that was roasting on the grill. But I didn't just want a shindig. I wanted a show. I sneaked out of her yard, leaving Matilda tied up for a few more minutes. I knew she wasn't going anywhere, and I also knew that the lunatic wanted everyone to see her special attraction before perhaps putting my poor cow on the spit as the main course. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Sheriff," my voice came out calmer than I expected. "Tell me, what's wrong?" he answered, already knowing that if I was calling, it was because something unusual had happened. "Can you believe my cow is missing?" Silence. "Your cow, Maud, she herself. She disappeared earlier today, but I think I found out where she is." The sheriff sighed. He'd been dealing with that woman for a long time, so I didn't even have to finish the sentence for him to understand. "I'm going," he said, before I could even tell him the address. While I waited, I made a point of keeping an eye on the party. The loud laughter and toasts continued, and that woman was at the center of it all, posing as if she were a queen serving a banquet to her subjects. A lady from the neighborhood, clearly bewitched by the hostess's false generosity, raised her glass and exclaimed, "Wow, Karen, what delicious meat! What's that?" She smiled, with that air of superiority that made me want to tear my hair out. "Oh, just top-quality meat, dear. Here at my party, we only serve the best." The best, in this case, was my cattle. My blood rushed to my head. It was at that moment that I heard the sound of car tires in the driveway. The sheriff had arrived. He got out of the car with his usual poise, calm but lethal. The kind of man who didn't need to shout to make his authority felt. He looked around, saw the crowd eating and drinking, sniffed the air, and then looked at me. "So, do you want to tell me the whole story?" I crossed my arms, trying to hold back the satisfaction of seeing him there. "Well, Sheriff, you see," I began, my voice laced with irony. I woke up early this morning and my cow wasn't in the stable. But as the universe is kind, I stumbled across a sign advertising a big community barbecue. And isn't it just coincidence that my cow was tied up right there in the yard? The sheriff looked where I was pointing. Maud, as peaceful as ever, ruminated on what little grass she could find. She was the only one at that party who had no idea of the misfortune that had almost befallen her. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Oh no, that woman again? Again? So it wasn't the first time she'd gotten up to something. He turned away from the party and walked towards the main tent. Some people noticed and shut up instantly. Others continued to get their fill, not really caring. But that woman, oh, she felt it. She realized that the joke was about to end. I tried to hold on to the back of the crowd, watching. The sheriff walked over to the barbecue, looked at the cuts of meat on the grill, and then turned his eyes to the woman. What's going on here? She smiled in her typical way, the same smile she used when she wanted to manipulate someone. Oh, Sheriff, what a surprise! Are you here to join us? We've got top-quality meat. Look at that. She held out a perfectly grilled slice as if she were offering a piece of heaven. If she only knew what was coming. The sheriff ignored the meat and pointed to the back of the yard. Is that your cow tied up over there? Her expression wavered, but only for a fraction of a second. Why, no, she said, feigning indignation. I don't know how that animal got here. It must have gotten lost and wandered into my yard. But like a good citizen, I just looked after it. Of course, you looked after it so well that you almost threw it on the grill. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. And did you notify anyone about this lost cow? She smiled. Well, I haven't had time yet. The sheriff nodded slowly, as if he'd heard the same excuse before. You know what's funny, Karen? He said, in a light but cutting tone. The owner of that cow is right over there. He pointed at me. The crowd turned their eyes in my direction. Now the show was complete. The woman lost the color in her face, but kept her pose. Well, then he should thank me for taking such good care of him. The sheriff crossed his arms. If I were you, I'd stop talking now. She opened her mouth to protest, but this time even she couldn't hold in the absurdity of her own lie. She stood there looking from side to side, as if looking for a way out of what was about to happen. But there was no way out. The sheriff turned to me. Do you want to file the complaint now, or would you prefer to wait until she tries to steal another animal? I looked at Matilda, at my poor cow, who continued to chew grass leisurely, unaware that she had almost become the main course at the party. Then I looked at the guests, some of whom were already discreetly walking away, pretending they had never been there. I took a deep breath. Ah, yes, I wanted to file the complaint, and I wanted everyone to see. But first, I was going to let that woman sweat a bit more. The silence that overtook the party was almost poetic. The guests, once excited by the barbecue, were now tense, exchanging glances as if looking for a strategic way out. No one wanted to be associated with the disaster that was about to happen. After all, the meat they were devouring there might not have been Matilda's, but some other gift that the woman had taken without permission. And so, there she was, standing in the middle of the event itself, with that nervous smile and that posture of someone who always thought she was going to get away with everything. But not today. The sheriff turned to me, waiting for confirmation. I didn't have to think twice. I want to file the complaint. Now! The woman snorted. She made her typical face, the same one she made when she saw someone parking a car 2 centimeters out of line, or when a child ran on the sidewalk without permission. Oh, what a drama! She grumbled, crossing her arms. It was just a little misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? My patience. You stole my cow and had a party with it, I said, pointing at the tent and the plates still full of meat. How is that a misunderstanding? She threw her head back, laughing as if it was me who was exaggerating. My God, what an exaggeration. Do you really think I'd take a cow to barbecue? For God's sake, this is a community event. I organized all this for the neighborhood. The sheriff shook his head, already impatient. Karen, Your excuse is already becoming a joke. The owner of the cow is here. The cow is over there. You organized a barbecue, and you don't have a receipt for the meat you bought. Now you have two options. Either you settle this the right way, or I'll take you straight to the police station, and we'll see how the justice system deals with misunderstandings. That's when desperation really began to hit her. You could see in her eyes that the chips were falling. The woman who had always acted like she was in charge of everything, like she was above the rules, suddenly realized that the only thing that was going to bake at that party was her name on the criminal record. She looked around for support, but the guests were already pretending they didn't even know the hostess. One woman even discreetly dropped her plate on the table before sneaking away. One man coughed and said something about needing to fetch the children. Within minutes, half of those present had disappeared like rats abandoning a sinking ship. She tried to take a step back, but the sheriff was quicker. "Don't even try," he warned her. Finally, she dropped her pose and tried to negotiate. Okay. I admit that maybe I took the cow without telling you," she began, as if confessing a minor sin. "But I was going to give it back. It was just to, decorate the party, give it a rural charm." I took a step forward. "Then why the hell is there meat roasting on the grill?" She widened her eyes and shook her head quickly. "That's not your cow's meat, I swear. I bought this meat at a butcher's. I'm sure the receipt is out there. Somewhere. Of course. And I'm the King of England." The sheriff sighed, pulled the handcuffs from his belt, and spoke with the calm of someone who had been waiting for this for a long time. "Karen, you're under arrest for theft and embezzlement." And then came the scream. That scream. The scream that only comes out of the mouth of someone who has spent her whole life being bossed around and has never taken no for an answer. The kind of sound that a tantrum-throwing child makes when they discover that, in real life, they can't just kick and scream until they get what they want. She tried to back away, but the sheriff grabbed her arm and started handcuffing her right there in front of everyone. "This is an outrage!" she shouted. "I'm a respectable citizen. I contribute to this community. You can't treat me like this." "Yes, I can," the sheriff replied dryly, "because theft is still a crime, even for respectable citizens." She began to struggle like a 5-year-old who doesn't want a bath. "I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue everyone. This is abuse of authority." "Abuse is what you did to that cow," I muttered, just to provoke her. Maud, as if sensing that justice was being served, let out a long, quiet moo. She had probably mooed more than anyone else at the party at that point. The woman continued screaming as the sheriff escorted her out of the yard. By this point, the party had completely dissolved. The DJ turned off the music and started collecting the equipment as if he were cleaning up a crime. The smell of meat on the grill, which had once seemed inviting, now just made me sick. I wanted to get out of there. So, before I left, I did one last thing. I walked over to Matilda, untied the rope, and patted her on the head. "Come on, little girl. Let's go home." She followed me, obediently, without looking back. Matilda and I left that open-air circus without looking back. But, as we walked along the dirt road that led back to my ranch, I could hear that woman's cries of indignation echoing in the air, further and further away. It was almost poetic. The barbecue queen had fallen, and fallen badly. After making sure my cow was safe in the stable, I decided to go to the police station to finalize the complaint. Yes, because I'm not the type to let a crime like this pass by as if it were just a miscommunication, as she would surely try to argue later. When I got there, the sheriff was already finishing filling out her arrest papers. As soon as he saw me, he let out a long sigh. "Everything is ready here. She'll spend the night in her cell." I couldn't hold back a satisfied smile. "That's great, but what now?" The sheriff rubbed his forehead, visibly tired. "Now we have to wait for her to try to get out of this with some cheap lawyer and a ridiculous excuse. But with so many witnesses who saw the cow at her party and the meat on the grill, not to mention the poster she made bragging about the community barbecue, it's going to be hard for her to get out of this without at least paying a fine. Fine? I frowned. I want a lot more than a fine, Sheriff. He looked at me with an expression that said, I knew you'd say that, and then nodded. Well, in that case, you'd better get ready, because this woman isn't going to accept defeat that easily. And he was right. In the days that followed, news of her arrest spread faster than gossip in a hairdresser's shop. Everyone heard about the great community barbecue that almost had an illegal ingredient. Some people were horrified, others found it hilarious. But best of all, the community itself started to turn against it. After all, nobody likes to be caught in the middle of such a mess. Many of the people at the party began to pretend they had never been there. Others swore that they had only stopped by to say hello, and that they had no idea where the meat had come from. Some even invented that they were only there to have a soft drink and leave early. And Karen? Oh, she didn't take the hit. As soon as she was released from the police station, she tried to turn the tables. First, she started spreading a rumor that she was the real victim. Can you believe that madman invented this stolen cow story just to hurt me? He wants my position on the neighborhood committee. Yes, that's what you read. In her mind, I had set up this whole mess to take her place in the ridiculous group of gossipy neighbors who thought they had more power than they really did. But nobody fell for it. Then she tried to say that it was all just a misunderstanding. It was just a decorative cow, people. I would never do something as horrible as steal an animal for a barbecue. So they started asking where the meat she served came from. And that's when the house of cards began to crumble for good. If there's one thing a closed community loves more than arbitrary rules, it's a scandal involving someone who has always been the authority figure. And that woman was the greatest symbol of the neighborhood's hypocrisy. The same people who used to be terrified of her began to turn against her. And it wasn't long before stories began to emerge. Did you know that she once confiscated a child's bicycle because it didn't fit in with the aesthetics of the street? They say she once entered a neighbor's yard just to measure the height of his fence and threaten a fine. I've heard that she's invented rules that don't even exist just to kick a dog out of the neighborhood because she didn't like its barking. Suddenly, it wasn't just the cow that was the problem. The whole community began to see that this woman was nothing more than a neighborhood dictator with a superiority complex. And then, the icing on the cake. The Neighborhood Association Committee voted to remove her from office. That's right, she lost the position she loved most, and for the first time, that woman could do nothing. Without her position on the committee, she became just another normal resident. No power, no privileges, no more opportunities to make everyone's life hell. But I wasn't finished yet, because while all this mess was going on, I filed a lawsuit against her. Yes, because as well as wanting to see her humiliated, I wanted to see her pockets bleed. I want compensation for the damage and stress caused, I explained to my lawyer. He laughed. Oh, that'll be easy. She made a point of documenting the crime herself, and that's exactly what happened. She had to pay for the damage to my stable, the costs of the complaint, and every penny of the fine she received from the town hall for the unauthorized event. She lost more money than she expected. And the worst thing for her, she had to pay me directly. I made sure the payment was made by check, so that she would have to sign my name with her own hand. I imagine it hurt more than the public humiliation. After all that, she tried to keep her dignity. She walked the streets with her chin up, pretending that nothing had happened. But everyone knew she was nobody anymore. And what about me? Well, I went back to my quiet life, knowing that Maud and I would never again have to worry about an unexpected attack of bovine kleptomania. And the next time that woman decides to have a community barbecue, she'd better bring her receipts. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.